Hi there! In this set of videos, we're going to be talking about the cycle of domestic violence and dating abuse, and how we can prevent that and end that cycle by learning about our own boundaries and building healthy relationships. Let's go ahead and start by introducing ourselves. Our agency is called Safe Passage, and we are a violence prevention agency, working with anyone dealing with domestic violence, dating abuse, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. That includes people who have directly experienced these things, as well as people who might know or love someone who has experienced this. We work with anyone of any age or any gender, and we serve Idaho's 5 northern counties. To learn more about what we do specifically and how we help survivors in North Idaho, watch the linked video. It describes all of these services that are listed here. These are all things that we do, so to learn more about them, go ahead and watch the video that we have linked that describes these services in more depth. So to make sure that we're all on the same page, let's go ahead and start with looking at the definition of dating violence that we'll be using throughout these videos. Dating violence is a pattern of abusive or threatening behaviors that are used to gain power and control over a dating partner or significant other. This can happen in lots of different types of relationships. It can be a past relationship or a current relationship, and the length of that relationship doesn't matter. It can look like lots of different things. It doesn't always look like just one thing. Dating abuse isn't always physical. It can also include sexual abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, digital dating abuse as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples and red flags, common red flags for each of these types of abuse. Physical abuse is any intentional and unwanted contact. So this could include things like scratching, punching, strangling, kicking, physical harm in that way. It could also include throwing objects or destroying property, especially when it destroys their partner's items. It could include things like pulling their hair or grabbing their face or their arm or their clothing, pushing them, pulling them, shoving them, trying to get them to go or move in a way that they don't want to or go to a place that they don't want to as well. Anytime a weapon is involved, that can be included as sexual abuse. Any non-consensual or unwanted physical contact, forcing them to engage in any sexual behaviors or sexual acts. It could also include preventing them from leaving, so like blocking a doorway or something like that, or forcing them to go somewhere. So forcing them into a room, forcing them out of a room, maybe grabbing their arm and pushing them or forcing them to go somewhere, those types of behaviors. Sexual abuse is any non-consensual sexual behavior. This can include unwanted kissing or touching, unwanted rough or violent sexual activity. One of the most common ones that probably comes to our mind is rape or attempted rape. It can also include things like refusing to use condoms or protection, removing that during sex, or restricting their partner's access to birth control or protection, or things like that. Any sexual contact with someone who is very intoxicated or unconscious or unable to give consent for some other reason. It can include using threats or pressure or manipulation to perform sexual acts or to get somebody to engage in any sexual behavior. It could include using peer pressure or making their partner feel guilty or immature or bad about themselves if they don't consent to sexual activity. And it can also include things like sexual insults, harassment, unwanted sexual comments about their body, or things like that. Emotional or psychological abuse is any non-physical, controlling, or threatening or manipulating behaviors. So that can include things like calling their partner names, putting them down, embarrassing them, yelling at them, or screaming at them, embarrassing them especially in front of people, isolating them from friends and family, so kind of trying to pull them away from the other people in their lives and kind of blocking those relationships off, controlling where they can go or what they can do, controlling how they can dress or present themselves. It can often include putting the blame on the partner for the abusive or unhealthy behaviors that might be happening. Maybe using jealousy or accusing them of cheating. Things like threatening to commit suicide or threatening to harm other people can be very common. Just as a note, it is very important, especially if this is happening in a relationship of maybe minors or something like that. It is very, very important that we do get someone that we trust involved at that point. Especially if they're threatening to commit suicide, it's very important that we go and find someone that we trust, a trusted adult, whether that's a teacher or school staff or a parent or a student resource officer. We're finding someone else who can kind of step in and get that person the help that they need at that point. That is very important. It might also include threatening to expose their partner's secrets, maybe threatening to out them or expose sexual orientation or maybe their immigration status or things like that that might be private or personal information about them that they don't want shared, threatening to or actually sharing that information, or spreading rumors or telling lies about them as well. Digital dating abuse is using technology as a weapon to gain power or control over a dating partner. So that can include controlling who they can be friends with on social media or controlling who they can follow or interact with on the internet, sending negative or insulting or threatening messages through the internet, using social media or texting to keep constant tabs or constantly texting questions like, who are you? Where are you? Who are you with? What are you doing? Send me a photo so that I know that you're telling the truth, those types of things. Making their partner feel afraid to be separated from their phone for more than 30 seconds or however long it might be. It could include putting them down in posts online. It could include sending unwanted explicit photos or pressuring their partner to send photos that they're not comfortable with. It might include stealing or insisting on being given passwords to the phone or to social media or their computer, things like that. Going through their phone, checking all their pictures, their texts, their calls, things like that as well. It could include tagging them in pictures or other posts on social media that they don't want posted or that they don't want tagged in. It can also include using technology, like GPS technology, Snap Maps, Find My Friends, things like that to monitor where their partner is going. So are these types of behaviors that we see happening in unhealthy relationships that we see? Do any of these examples stand out or surprise you? We know that these are not the only types of behaviors that can happen in an unhealthy or abusive relationship. These are just some common behaviors that we see, especially in relationships among teens or young people. So we could continue talking for a very, very long time about all of the types of behaviors that could potentially be unhealthy or abusive, but we don't have the time to do that. These are some common ones. If anybody does have more questions about specific behaviors or things like that, you can feel free to reach out to us, and we're more than happy to talk about specific behaviors or specific red flags. We also want to look at who experiences abuse, because sometimes we might have a perception that domestic violence only happens with a man or a boy abusing a woman or a girl, but we do know that that's not always the case. We know that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner. Intimate partner means a spouse, a dating partner, a co-parent, or some other type of significant other. We also know that people who are transgender or gender non-conforming, especially youth, experience these types of violence at even higher rates. So we know that it happens very, very commonly, and it doesn't always look like just one thing. So take a few minutes to think about these questions. What makes a relationship healthy or unhealthy? Is it possible to love someone and still treat them badly? How many times does a hurtful behavior have to happen before it's unhealthy? How can you tell the difference between normal disagreements and abuse? Why might someone stay in an abusive relationship? So take some time to think about these questions. Go ahead and pause the video and choose at least one or two of these questions to answer or reflect on. Let's look at the last question specifically. Often we can have a perception that if a relationship is abusive, the person can easily leave and everything will be better, but we know that that's not always the case. Why might it be very, very difficult for someone to leave an abusive relationship? Again, go ahead and pause this video and just in a few minutes come up with as many possible reasons as you can for why it might be very difficult for someone to leave an unhealthy or abusive relationship. Okay, so how many answers did you come up with? Some common answers that we often hear are maybe conflicting emotions. Maybe there's a lot of fear of what might happen if they leave. They might believe that the abuse is normal. They might have a low self-esteem or a belief that they somehow deserve those abusive behaviors or that somehow those behaviors are their own fault. They might very well have feelings of love or affection for their partner. Maybe they've been together for a long time or they have a history together. They might rely on their partner for money or for support. Maybe they feel pressure from friends or family to stay in that relationship. Maybe they and their partner have children together. Maybe they feel unsafe leaving, or there's a fear of the unknown, or they're not sure what will happen, or they don't know if people will believe them. There's a lot of very, very common reasons why it can be very difficult for someone in an abusive relationship to leave that relationship. Another common reason why people might stay in an abusive relationship is what we call a cycle of abuse. So we're going to go ahead and pause the video right now, and then when we come back, we're going to look at what we call the cycle of abuse and why that can make leaving an unhealthy or abusive relationship very difficult. So go ahead and pause, and then we'll come back and finish that discussion about the cycle of abuse.